Hi, welcome to the Scalability Playbook. This is episode 4, and I'm your host, Debasish Mishra. With me is my co-host, Mike Park. And we're here to break down what's real in technology and how you can scale and achieve agility in the enterprise. And we're really excited with this episode because we're joined by our very first guest, international speaker, author, and CEO of CTO Resources, Malik. Nick, if you've ever looked at LinkedIn, and especially about topics on architecture, you are going to find Nick all over the place. Nick is one of the most prolific thinkers on enterprise architecture that I've ever met. He's also a former colleague of mine. So we're very excited to have you, especially because today our major topic is going to be about enterprise architecture and how do you use that as a discipline to achieve scalability. And I think it's a controversial topic, and we're going to dive right into it. But before we go there, I do want to thank everyone who's shown their support for the podcast, and we appreciate your likes. We appreciate when you share it. If you have comments, if you have thoughts, we of course welcome those. So please do that. You can find us on YouTube, on all of the major podcast platforms. So please like and subscribe. And all right, let's start with our first topic. I always want to know, what are you learning? And we'll start with you, Mike. What did you learn in the last month?
Sure. I mean, a month is a long time now, right? Amazing what happens in a short period of time. So I started getting pulled into vibe programming. Like what's vibe programming? Oh, using AI to build. Okay, great. And that took me into the cursor and Winsters. Oh, they forked Visual Studio Code and made it AI enabled. That then took me into model context protocols or MCP servers. So that was intriguing to go, all right, what are these? And I think you can relate to this, Debasish, the work you've been doing in the agentic space of how do LLMs are great, language models are great, but I want them to do stuff. And I want to make them take these bespoke tools and stitch them together. MCP to me is the rest. What REST did for the web development world, MCP will do for the AI agentic. So that's what I really got diving into. Like, I see a lot of potential here. I can take my knowledge now of what I want to wrap up for AI capabilities, wrap it into an MCP server type capability, and put that into my chain, whatever it is I'm building out. So I was really impressed with that. I see a lot of, to me, it takes some of the pain points away of, yeah, AI is nice, but how do I put it under management? Oh, this is how I can put it under management. So that's the thing that I kind of jumped in, that caught my eye this month. I've been deep diving into that. So.
Super interesting. I keep seeing the acronym, and I've not had the time to really dive in. What about you, Nick? What have you been focused on?
Well, I've been focused on two things. One is I'm putting together a package of stuff for enterprise architecture teams that they'd be able to just use these resources to reboot and to kind of reorganize and realign themselves. Because most EA teams, we'll have that discussion a little bit later, but EA teams often find themselves in a non-functioning space. And then, also,
I don't know what you're talking about, Nick.
Of course. And I'm also diving into AI as well. I don't think we can avoid it anymore. AI seemed like a fad for a bit, and then it seemed like everyone was going to disagree on what it was. But now it's time for me to be able to have good conversations about what artificial intelligence is. So I've started with LLMs, and I'll be working toward agentic models as well. So I'm following behind you, Michael. I will, I'll learn what you're going to share here, and I'll add it to my list of things to dig into.
Yeah, perfect. How about you, Debasish? What's the hot thing you got into?
I don't know if it's hot. Well, maybe it is, because I think it's interesting. So last night I spent evening talking to an AI agent. It was a voice agent that I spun up, and that's really what I've been looking at is, how do these voice agents work? Super interesting. Again, we go back to that composability architecture that we talked about before. So there's a piece of it that's really handling the voice aspects in terms of, text to speech and speech to text. There's a piece of it that's really the LLM model that's really driving the conversation, and you're training it. And then, all sorts of really interesting stuff happens, once you get the output and the outcomes of that. So really interesting model. Hopefully I'm going to build something that I can share later, but really, really interesting in terms of just how it comes together. It's again pulling on those architectural patterns that we've talked about in terms of trying to make it work and make work reliably.
Was it conversational that you built? So you were talking to it and it was responding back to you, or was it just text to speech?
Yeah, it was a conversation.
Okay.
So I
Very
was talking
nice.
to it and it was talking back. We were having a conversation.
Because
Right.
I'm impressed at how, like, the Azure Speech Studio, how this has become commodity, that they give this
Right.
the first 500,000 characters are free, right? And I was able to take a pred. So one of these EA decks that I got to present 100 times, right? And I talk 100 miles an hour, I present, people get exhausted. So I thought, let me try this. I took a 30 slide deck, went into Azure. I was able to have different voices and then do the lexicons and click, 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 trap into PowerPoint, put it on as an MP3 in 30 minutes. And it didn't cost me a dime.
Nice.
I was blown away by that. It was commodity text to speech. That was impressive.
So one of the things that I talk about in my book on storytelling is that there's learning styles. People learn in different ways. And if I just put a PowerPoint presentation up on the wall, I can just have 3 words on each slide. Alan used to do that all the time. He would have 3 words on each slide and he would zip through the slides really fast. And that's one way that you're not really using the slide except to trigger an emotion. Another way is to put those words on the slide and then stand there and stare at it and drain the slide. Right? You've seen it. You've seen those presentations.
I've been up.
Boring as anything, but some people actually learn from stuff like that. But I think that the folks who learn from listening have been ignored. They've been listening. They've been looking for speakers, and that's great. Here we are with 3 speakers, but it's hard to learn a specific topic unless you can hear it, if that's how you learn. So I think the text to speech is really remarkable. I think it's going to open up a lot of avenues for people who learn through hearing to be able to learn some material that's otherwise maybe difficult to pick up.
Nick, that's spot on. You know, silly little story, right? So Nick, we haven't worked a lot. I'm a storyteller myself. I like to tell a story.
Good.
So I'm going to college. I'm learning assembly language. Remember these classrooms where they had the 15 boards and the instructor would swipe one up, and he's doing code. And all these people are taking notes. Well, I didn't take notes. I listened. I comprehended. That's how I learned. About halfway through it, he steps back and goes, "Oh no, this is all wrong." Never mind. And everyone starts tearing up their notes. I had to drop the course because I had learned it. I couldn't now unlearn it because I heard it and I consumed it, right? So I am one of those listeners. You're right. And I'm be honest, I didn't think about that. You're right. That does help, right? That text to speech. I don't want to read it. Tell me and let me consume it. That's a great observation.
Definitely. I think it's super exciting, all of the evolution of these technologies. I think now that they're becoming more accessible, it's going to be really interesting to see what developers and creators come up with because the technology is so accessible. So really exciting stuff. So CIO Magazine just recently published a study that says that AI projects in the enterprise are failing to the tune of between 85 to 90% failures. And, maybe surprising, maybe not surprising for those of us who've spent a fair amount of time in the enterprise. I'd be curious, Nick, what do you think about that? And, is there something that folks should do or take away from that? Is there a way to make these more successful?
Well, I'd start by saying that, if you have a large category where everything fails, and then you try to take a subcategory of that and saying everything is failing, you might want to say, well, let's subtract the statistics for the larger category. Over 75% of all IT projects fail. So if you just get down to that 25% that's left, but you've already removed a lot of those AI projects. So I would say that, I'm not surprised that AI projects fail. I think there's a couple things. I don't think the technology is really ready. I think we're still trying to figure that out. Most developers, they like frameworks. I mean, a React is better than writing in JavaScript, flat out, right? And I write in Go, and everything is a framework. I mean, even Kobe writes original in Go. They're all adopting what library or another.
Yeah.
And the same thing for Python. Can you imagine people doing things in Python without using some of these Python libraries? Maybe way back when, but So, I think we need to have well-established patterns, well-established libraries that make it easy to do the right thing. And then we'll see a higher success rate. Also, I think we're all still just trying to figure it out. The businesses don't know what to ask for. The developers don't know what they can deliver. They haven't delivered it before. I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, to me, I always go back to the old, it wasn't, years ago, it was blockchain. I don't know what it is, but I know it can solve my problems. And that's how AI is today, right? I'm not sure what it is, but I know it can solve my problems. RPA, I don't know what RPA is, but I know it can solve my problem. So that's kind of what I'm seeing, elements of it. And I think it can. It just needs to get, to Nick's point, standardized, kind of socialized into the solutioning models. So it's not, I'm doing AI for the sake of AI. I'm doing a project that has AI in it. Like the one thing I always like is, do you have an AI strategy? No. We don't need an AI strategy. We need a enterprise architecture strategy that has AI components in it. That's what we need, not an AI strategy. Like, what's your AI strategy? To do business, right? To take value, the same, right? And AI is just a component of it. Do not drive AI for the sake of AI. I think that would be my opinion. I bet you if you were to do retrospectives on these, you'd see that was the failure rate, was because they tried to fit AI into something that maybe wasn't ready or baked in yet to be executed. But that would be my take. I would look.
Yeah, I definitely think FOMO is driving a lot of these AI projects initially. Especially because the large language model guys are hyping the crap out of it, right? Like Sam Altman is telling us that this thing is going to replace PhDs, right?
But it's not just Sam. I mean, my God,
right.
Everybody's talking about
right.
it like that.
Right. And
Everybody don't even know what it is we're talking about.
Exactly. Right. And so like there's so much hype around how amazing this is. And I think that's driving all this FOMO type behavior to make sure that nobody's missing out. And when they don't have the skill sets and they don't really know what the use case is, and I think candidly, I think it's what you said, Nick, like the applications aren't there, right? Like when you look at these LLM models, they're really just broad platforms. They've not been designed to be applied to any particular problem. And so it's a little bit ethereal, I think. At my last company, we did do an AI project. We basically did a 6-month project with Microsoft Copilot, right? When it was first, or relatively recently into its launch on the Office 365 platform. And that initial version was not really integrated into the product suite. It was just kind of this sidebar thing. And what we did was every 2 weeks we got together and we said, hey, what did you try? What did you try? Did it work? Right? Because so we weren't really trying to solve a problem. We were just trying to figure out, well, what does it do? And what does it do well?
Right.
Because nobody was saying what it could do. Right.
One of the things I think that we've learned to do with AIs is you tell the AI, the large language model, what kind of results you're looking for. And you can even give them examples on how to share the results with you. So you can ask for, you can ask a question and you can ask for it to come back in JSON. And you can specify what fields to provide and it'll provide it for you in that way. It's actually very cool. The challenge with that is, if you're not careful, you're telling it what to not tell you. You're basically going to exclude the right answers.
You're boxing it in, right? You're boxing it in. Yeah. 100%.
You'll hear the answer you want to hear, not the answer that you need to hear. And the human side of that's not going to go away anytime soon. People who are afraid of being replaced by artificial intelligence. Some people are, some people should be. But the reality is that the human thought requires so much more context than an AI model can currently handle. I'd say currently. That stuff changes every few minutes.
And the context switching a human can do that an AI model right now can't. The grounding features in these AI models. To your point though, Nick, they'll catch up, right? They'll but as of right now, so that's another factor in failure rates, right? They're just not, and like you said, Nick, they're just not ready. They're close. They're getting there better every day. Like the JSON thing you mentioned. I've done that where it's JSON, but it's not fully qualified JSON sometimes, right? Sometimes
it doesn't come back very good.
No, there's a quote in there that shouldn't be in there, or a semicolon that wasn't supposed to be there, because there's no validation. It's still text being just generative text. It's not true. But again, this is where I would lean into. You're spot on, I think, Nick, with the framework concepts of how Python accelerated because of those libraries and frameworks. The NuGets, the pips, the npms. Those accelerated web development. I think that's earlier. I was talking about MCP. I think MCP is going to then start to standardize. I'm going to use your capability, and the LLM can plug into the capability. It will start to standardize. Then we'll start to see a smoothing out of these capabilities.
Yeah, I think there's layers and layers of things that need to be added. Not just what does an LLM produce, but why would we always use an LLM? I mean, knowledge representation can be done without using an LLM. In fact, it should be done without using. That's my opinion. I'm sorry. I graduated with a degree in artificial intelligence, but that was 1988. The world was a different place.
That's awesome.
But I do think knowledge representation should be done. I think you can have a larger context that way, a context about what that person seems to know or believe, a context about what their situation or their world or their environment says or believes or knows. If I know that you're a person who is, I'm going to make something up here. Joe is a religiously fundamentalist Christian who lives in Georgia. Okay. Mary is she's an atheist who lives in Silicon Valley, and she sells crystals on the web. You and me, we're already in our head creating contexts for these people, right? AIs can't do that yet.
Yep, that's right.
But if we can build their context for what their expectations are, what their thinking likely is, and then we can fine tune it by conversing. Now I can ask Mary about some things. I can ask Joe about some things, and I can fine tune. But right now I can't. And AI is not there yet. It's not. I think there's layers of things that need to be added.
But look where we've seen it in play. These algorithms that are on the Instagrams and the TikToks, where they take this down these dark alleys because it can't do that context settling, right? Or it's using the AI algorithm and saying, oh, you want to know about this? I didn't. Why did you think? You don't know my context, right? So I think I think what it does is sometimes shapes individuals that, maybe I did want to know about that. You brought me down a path that I normally might not have gone down about. And I think that's the dangerous side of it, right? That's what we get into. Oh, geez, what are we doing with this thing? Is this Pandora's box, really? So
you get into the echo chamber. Social media echo chamber is really dangerous.
Yeah.
Because it eliminates competing ideas. It prevents you from hearing things that might contradict your preconceived ideas, even if they're truthful.
Yep.
We've seen that. There was a study about TikTok that came out about 2 or 3 years ago, where a graduate assistant took 75 or 100 individual accounts on TikTok and fed them to specific rules about what they would do to figure out how quickly TikTok is going to pin you into a bubble.
Yeah.
5 minutes.
Wow. Yeah.
5 minutes of interaction, they've already pinned you into a bubble.
Yeah.
And it's completely remarkable when you think about it. And that's dangerous as heck.
I agree.
Sure. So obviously we're not enthusiastic about what is the maturity of enterprise architecture. I'm getting ahead of
listen
myself.
to you jumping me.
Get into it.
We're not enthusiastic about, what is the maturity of AI as a technology yet, in order to lend itself to success. But if you are in this space, are there things that we can do to make those types of projects more successful? Are there 2 or 3 things that organizations can do to achieve more success, whatever that success ultimately looks like?
I can jump in.
You go first, Nick, and I'll follow behind you.
The first thing that occurs to me is to set expectations better. I think proof of concepts that would look at what is really possible with the technology today, and trying to decide if that's worth it. I honestly think that many of those projects that are considered unsuccessful got too far. They spent too much money, they spent too much time to produce no results because they tried to do something where the technology wasn't ready, or maybe the business wasn't ready. That's a real problem. I don't want my computer telling me what I have to do next. I developed an RPA system for American Express many years ago, and it was very limited. It was very specific. This is before modern RPA systems. And, but as long as you knew exactly what you wanted it to do, then it worked brilliantly. But if you made any expectation, any expectation outside of that very narrow, very clear, specific, I needed to do this and that, then you were creating a problem. You could very easily create problems that could take, hours or days of manager time to fix. And so I think a part of it is setting the expectations in the business. What is it we are going to accomplish? I want to demonstrate for you what we can accomplish right now with the technology and our understanding, because we're not mature yet either. Maybe the technology can do more, but I can't make it do more. I think that will change a lot of what we call success in an AI project. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. In fact, I put a little structure to it. When I do these projects, the one thing I try to bring to the team is every team got the project charter, and those are set to do the balanced scorecard, right?
Yeah.
Budget, schedule, and success. I add another layer onto it, what I refer to as give me the approach note. What's the approach of what are our assumptions? What's the problem statement we're trying to solve? Give me some high-level design. Give me some, and at the end, give me the expected outcomes. What is it we're trying to achieve? So I can go traceable back to, did we really add business value when we did the exercise? AI, not AI, doesn't matter. And you touched on RPA. I'm going to use my story on RPA too, because I think we all have one, right?
Yeah.
We worked on a project. I got brought in that the team was trying to make RPA do, I can't remember what it was. It was invoice payment or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And I got brought in and we looked at it and we said, well, okay, once we run it through OCR, we do the unstructured data to structured. What do you need RPA for? That's just screen scraping. We'll just go right API into the ERP. Why do you have to do? Oh, because we told leadership we were going to do ARP. Well, that ain't the right thing. Go back and tell leadership we don't need RPA here. We can just use APIs. Right. But no, they wanted to prove that RPA had value. I go, but it does that. So I think transparency, honesty, and the ability to fail fast is also important. And leadership needs to say, it's okay if you fail. That should have been considered a success. No, you helped the company, you did a project, and you didn't use RPA. But we might look at it next time. Well done, guys. Not failure. Right? That you didn't use RPA. So making sure the expected outcomes are agreed upon and not be tool-centric, be business value-centric. That's what we need to do, I think. So,
yeah, I agree 100%. I'd echo everything you said. I wonder if those kinds of projects were considered failures, because ultimately we made the decision not to adopt AI because we didn't see the benefit in terms of what was available. I think, that kind of project was actually a success, right? That we spent a very small amount of money. We spent some time trying to understand, well, what can we do with this? And it doesn't look like we can do anything with it, at least in the state that it's in. So let's just kill it. I think that's a good outcome.
We don't value failure enough, I think, right? It's the old joke about the project manager that the project overran $2 million. He goes to his boss. He goes, "Are you going to fire me now?" "Fire you? I just spent $2 million training you," right? I mean, so we have to put value into the fact that failure's okay as long as we didn't, get on the front page of the New York Times because we failed. Let's make sure we're talking, but failures are okay. Fail fast is better than fail long, but fail fast. And there should be some perceived success. And we tried it, not ready yet, but we learned, we're smarter, and next time we'll be even better. I think there's value.
Right. I want to interject one thing, and that is that AI, we're experiencing this with the context of AI, but this is any serious innovation. If your and I'm an architect, sorry, I'm going to refer back, but if your architecture team doesn't care about innovation, you're not doing architecture. 100%. You're doing governance and you're whipping people. And innovation, every innovation has to have some of this. Try it, fail. Try something else, fail. Do it fast, do it quickly, get a proof of concept that actually can deliver some kind of value to someone. Hopefully it's a person who's going to defend you in front of other senior leaders. Show it to them, get them enthusiastic, get them excited, and now you have a project. But that's any innovation. That goes back to SOA, that goes back to REST, that goes back to just doing things with a web interface. I'm sorry, I'm dating myself now. But that goes back to pretty much any use of technology, any use of a new idea. AI is just the newfangled innovation.
100%.
But
Yeah.
all innovation has to have this as its fundamental core. Fail over and over.
Yeah.
And get better and
and
smart.
I think, right. And I think learn, right?
Yes.
Document
Yeah.
and understand why did it fail. Make sure you understand that. Because if you're not learning through that, then you're not really
Well, I
making
mean,
progress.
you could fail and then have your senior leadership fire everybody on the team except for the person who completely mistook why they were doing it in the first place. And then you just get to repeat yourself.
Yeah.
Yep.
I've done companies like that before.
Yeah.
I think all of us have. The last thing I'll say on this, and this goes back to the thing you'd mentioned at the beginning, Mike, when we got on this topic, is AI is not a strategy, right? At the end of the day, it's just a tool. And if you need a way to think about that, then another text typewriter. So would you have had writer strategy? Of course not, right? Writers are just a means, a mechanism to achieve something. And so AI is not the strategy. AI is just something that you're going to use to do something. And the question is, what are you trying to do?
Actions and intents. I always tell teams, don't let the actions overtake the intent. The intent is to solve this business problem. The action was use AI. And the AI didn't work. Well, maybe it wasn't supposed to. Just stay with the intent. What's the intent?
Mm-hmm.
And the intent should be business value. As architects, we're trying to bring business value. Right.
So Mike and I talk very often about architecture, and you've already heard it so far in this episode. And we really want to talk about enterprise architecture as a discipline and a methodology. If you go to almost any web forum, you will find religious debates on architecture and how to do it and whether it's valuable. And nobody has really seemed to have found a magic formula for making it work. And so we're really going to dive into that. And I'm going to start this topic by just asking the question, is enterprise architecture even relevant anymore?
It depends on the enterprise. I know that's not the right answer, but show me an architect who doesn't respond to a question like that with, it depends. That's the architect's answer, right? I honestly, if you're running a laundromat, you probably don't need enterprise architecture, right? If you're running a whole, array, maybe 700 laundromats, you probably have some back-end systems that need to communicate with one another, and you have some processes, and you need certain business capabilities. Enterprise architecture might be useful. But if you're running Chevron or Cisco, I do think enterprise architecture can be very valuable. That said, there's a whole bunch of different reasons to use EA, and you have to pick one. I'm not a fan of someone says, EA can do this and this and this and this, and it'll help you innovate with new products, and it'll help you cut costs, and no, stop. Pick. And use EA in that way. And then if you need to use EA in another way, set up another team to use EA in another way. I don't think that you're going to succeed having the be all and end all team. And I think that's been one of the problems that we've seen is too many people don't know what they want out of EA. They set a charter that can do 15 things and it fails on 13 of them. And so everybody thinks it's a failure when really they just focused on 2.
When you say have it focus on one of these things, what do you mean by that?
Give me a list of things.
Okay, so let's say that your organization has been going through an M&A cycle and you've purchased a bunch of companies. We've never seen that happen before. That happens all the time. And one of the things that we've seen is, now you end up with a lot of duplication of data masters, duplication of systems. You might have multiple ERPs. You almost certainly would have multiple CRMs. I've seen, one division in the company with 3 CRMs. That's not unusual because you can pull out your credit card and buy access to one. And it's not that the tools are expensive. Sometimes the tools are relatively cheap. It's just that it's expensive having data in multiple places. So in that environment, let's say I'm in this environment with multiple systems, multiple companies, and the strategy at the senior level is to achieve some kind of cost benefit by merging things together. Now, it's not a strategy of keeping them separate and everybody goes and does their own thing. That's a different type of strategy. So we want to create this coordinated model. We want to have something where we get benefit by having, one thing in the core. So your enterprise architecture can choose consistent data, a consistent core. If that's what you chose, consistent data in a consistent core, then you can allow all the edges to do whatever they want. You can have your reservation system on one side for your hotel chain and your property management on another side in your hotel chain, and they don't ever have to talk to each other. But your core would have your financial management, your HR, and your legal. And so as long as the data is consistent in the core, you've chosen that. That's your EA strategy. That's your one thing you're going to do well. You're not going to solve the property management problem. You're not going to solve the problems at the reservation system. Let the solution architects handle that, right? You're going to handle the one thing in the middle, and you're only going to be measured by, did you succeed in getting to consistent data in consistent applications? Do you have a data master for your customers? You know how hard that is to do. So, and to even know what customer is, right? I've seen, a lot of organizations, Debasish, you and I have worked at a company that could not define what a customer was.
Well, let's not bring back old traumas.
Memories, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, pick one. If another company says, well, we're a stable company, we've been doing this for, 50 years, we've got a lot of history on us, but we want to cut costs. We're not buying 50 different companies. We're not going into a whole bunch of different businesses. In fact, we're going to cut off some businesses. We're going to sell off some of those things around the edges that were just bad ideas of the previous CEO. And we're going to focus on our, on our hedgehog. Sorry, I'm going to use the terms from that book, Good to Great. We're going to focus on our hedgehog. Cutting costs is absolutely essential thing to do, and a lot of IT divisions find themselves having to do it. Let EA support cutting costs. But if it's supporting cutting costs, it's not supporting all those other possibilities. It's not doing it's not doing extensions, it's not doing project, business process management, except where it cuts costs. Have one thing that you do.
Interesting.
One big way to measure.
What do you think, Mike? I know it's kind of a dicey question because you're actually a chief architect. So
yeah, and so here, I'm chomping at the bit, Nick, to get your impression about what I'm about to say, because Debasish, I think you'll know where I'm going to go once I start saying this. I bring in, when I come into an organization, I talk about enterprise architecture, I bring my own architectural principle. And I'm going to describe it to you, and then I like to get your reaction to it. So I will come into an organization and I will say, always is cheap and sometimes is expensive. By what that I mean is I want us to try to drive to standards on always on infrastructure and code patterns and how we go in basic commodity capabilities so we can free up our capacity to do the sometimes work that should differentiate us to drive business value for the organization. So if we're a widget company, let's put all that sometimes effort into being widget makers. Let the always work be on network patterns and storage patterns and RESTful patterns and AI strategy. That should be standard. So when I say I'm an enterprise architect, I look at that's my job to come and be the steward and the champion of always and sometimes, the defender of those two areas. I'd be curious to get your, I've been using that for years. I'd love to hear some of your background experience. What do you think when I say that?
I like that. I think you've distilled down an absolute truth into something that's easily understandable and communicated, right? And at the end of the day, things are remembered when they can be understood and communicated in a story, right?
Yeah.
So I like the way you distilled that, because you're right. What differentiates your company, your product, your service, the thing you do that makes money for you that competes against somebody else. What differentiates that is where you should focus your hard work. And what doesn't differentiate you, rip it apart, tear it down to shreds, take it to its brass knuckles. Don't do anything crazy or difficult there. Make it as simple, repeatable, and, ironclad break-proof as you possibly can, because no one wants to take the time to fix things that are running in the, what happens when we fire Tom, or what happens when we don't get an invoice from ABC company. right? That should be very standard. That should be very automatic. Exceptions should be rare, and they should be easily handled with policy and systems. But no, I love the way you framed that.
Good. I'm glad to hear that, because I was curious to see what your feedback would be, because it's funny. I used it one time and I got some pushback. Someone said, "Oh, Mike, you can't mandate." I go, no, it's aspirational. Always is not a mandate. Always is an aspirational goal. It's a lever I challenge teams with and say, why are you doing something different here when we already do it that way over there? Either change so everyone is, because if you're saying it's better, then it should be better for them as well. And I know change management, how we might get all that, but why not one? Why not one tool to do it? Why do we have to have 5? And if there's true business value in why we do it, then great. Show me that business. I'll spend $1 to make $10 all day long. I will not spend $1 to make $1.15, right? I'm going to challenge you on that. So, and I'm just using cost as one example, right? Sustainability or stock or whatever those business value drivers you are, that you're guiding yourself by, that should be what we're driving. That's the business reason we're doing it. So to me, I push that into my teams all the time of why are we doing this? Challenge ourselves does this make sense for the organization to deliver that value?
So I'm going to challenge you with one question.
Great.
Most enterprises don't just have one business model.
100%.
So when you're taking that particular principle, always and versus sometimes, right? Always is cheap, sometimes is expensive. Do you apply it separately for each business model?
It depends on what you're talking about. Are we a federated organization where it's bespoke and it needs to be
Architect answer.
to say that, right? I'm required.
Ask
I'm
a question.
required.
You're going to get it depends.
I'm required that. So if the organization I'm in currently is a federated organization, then I have to be cognizant of the fact that they're federated. If they're a centralized organization, and no organization is ever centralized, right? So yes, you'll need to federate. And so this is where I always love the Amazon manifesto of, the old Jeff Bezos story about, I don't care how you expose your data, but you will expose it in a standard consumable pattern that everyone's aware of. So yes, don't care if you're going to be different. You want to use React, you want to use Vue, you want to use jQuery, I don't care. But when you expose it to the world, standard rest. I'm just using that as an example, right? So if you're going to be bespoke in your group, but when you come to the enterprise, you be standard. That would be my answer, how I would address it, right? So yes, run lean, clean, and mean, how you do it yourselves in your isolated world. But when you come out to the organization, you go standard. That's what I would put for. And try to.
And that makes sense.
It's aspirational. It's aspirational.
Well, yeah, I think the challenge is most companies don't know how they're structured. I mean, honestly, you can talk to 10 senior leaders and get 12 different answers for how they're
Conway's
structured.
law, right? I always bring Conway's law to these conversations. You can say everyone you want, but this is how we run. You can dictate all you want, but this is how we run. Bob's going to come to my office and tell me I'm not going to do that as soon as the meeting's over, right? We all know that. So why are you telling it differently? Like, let's just lean into what we know. That's the other thing. Let's call it what it is, and let's move forward.
Or fire Bob.
Or fire Bob. That's what I was,
I'm not trying. I'm being kind of facetious, but at the same time, that's honestly sometimes the way you make a change. So as you move a person out of a position of authority, 100%. Who is your obstacle?
It sends the message, right? The organization. It says this is that important to us that we are going to put someone on the line that they didn't follow the rules. That's how important it is.
Right. But that's honestly where a lot of organizations run into the challenge. So architecturally, Mike, I agree with you in terms of when I think about an organization, whether I'm the chief architect or whether I'm the chief technology officer, like that's where I'm trying to drive to is where do we divide between everything and every time versus sometimes, right? But I think the failure of architecture, and this is why I would never encourage anyone to be a chief architect.
No, it's a thankless job. It's absolutely thankless.
It's not just because it's a thankless job. It's because I think the organizational model for architecture is in most places a failure. Because for most places, especially places that are not highly regulated, in those places, architecture is an influence job. It is not baked into the delivery model in any way. And so architects are sitting there trying to convince people to do the right thing or to even be relevant, right? To be able to be even invited to the party. And to me, that's insanity, right? Because you can be the best architect on the planet, but you cannot succeed in that model. You might be okay for a while, and then new leadership, and then you're out, right? Like, and I think that's honestly the fundamental failure. I think when we look at why do enterprise architecture organizations fail, it's because there is not an operating model that basically bakes architecture in. Now, different if you're in a regulated industry, right, where they're more worried about compliance and governance, and so those things are important. And I've seen it when I worked in pharma, baked right into the governance process, right? Go to any of the other industries we've all worked in where it's not true. It's a bunch of architects chasing people down saying, "Hey, you should do it this way." And they're like,
Because
yeah,
but architecture, one of the root cause problems I think is everyone thinks EA is an IT job, an IT function, and it's not, right? It's not an IT job. It is, how do I take the strategy to get to execution and architect my solutions, not just in the IT world, but in the business world as well? How do I execute the value delivery? It's not an IT function. So, but I'm always seen as the IT guy. And you won't let me get that tool. You're slowing me down. No, I'm trying to get you to go fast. I'm trying to bring agility in. I know it's short-term gain, long-term pain is what you're doing, right? I'm trying to get you into an agile methodology. So then when you need to make a change, because change is coming, you're going to be ready for it. But it's perceived as the IT guy slowing me down because I just need that tool, right? And that's where, go ahead, Nick. Yeah.
No, I want to add in a little insight that came apart. So I'm working with Neil McWhorter, who's an author in business architecture. He wrote a book a few years ago with Bill Ulrich on business architecture, and we're thinking of putting together a book. One of the things that we're looking at is patterns, using the concept of a pattern language to talk about how you structure enterprise architecture organizationally, how many different teams you have and how many different team leaders and what are their responsibilities and how are they aligned. Normal stuff, right? If you look at most frameworks like TOGAF, they'll tell you there's two ways to do it. One is where there's a chief architect and a team that has a whole bunch of enterprise architects. And the other is TOGAF says, there's a chief architect and then there's these different groupings of architects based upon BDAT. There's business architects and data architects and application architects, technology. They're all by their own little pylons. So I sat down with him and we were talking about what is the pattern, because the pattern you have to start with what's the problem you're trying to solve. And then you have to talk about how you're solving it, and you have to talk about what the implications of that solution, and you have to give it a name and, the pattern language stuff. And so I came up with, just in a brainstorm, eight or nine different ways to organize architecture in an organization. Only two of them had a chief architect. No offense, Mike. I mean, you're as a chief architect, I mean, you have your company or you're in a situation where it's just chosen one of those. That's fine.
Yep.
Right. But there are a lot of ways to do this. And when and it hadn't really occurred to me until we sat down and actually just worked it out.
Right. And
when you really work it out, you're like, why don't the frameworks talk about these other ways to structure architecture? Because I think one of the reasons, Debasish, to come back to what you were talking about, where we're chasing people, is because we've structured architecture in an organization in a way that doesn't match the way that organization needs it to work. So architecture can be used in multiple ways. Let's use it in the way that organization needs it to be used, rather than, one size fits all. This is what the open group says based upon what the Department of Defense said, 25 years ago, because that's really where, TOGAF came from. And so, why don't we step back a little bit and look at using architecture in different ways? That's where I got. And that was it was kind of one of those moments where so that's going to be in the book.
Good. I look forward to reading that.
Yeah, I agree with that to a great extent, right? I think I want architecture. After I was done being a chief architect, I became a chief technology officer, and I didn't have any architects. And organizationally, I couldn't afford to bring on architects, right? So what I wanted was architecture and not architects. I wanted architectural thinking, but not I didn't need
Yep.
the discipline or the function of architecture in our organization. And so it was a lot of pushing people to think architecturally. I think a lot depends on your scale, right? Like, I think, Nick, you hit on it really well, that I think there's a lot of attempts to make this discipline be very cookie cutter. And I think realistically, it can't be. To me, it's still not a science, it's an art. And that art
Art.
is really defined by what does the organization need? And so,
Absolutely.
we all know consultants and experts who basically say, no, there's only one way to do architecture. And I fundamentally disagree. It's got to be tailored and bespoke
Right.
to the organization in terms of what's going to work. Because if
It
you're not
depends.
thinking pragmatically about what's going to work within the organization, you're never going to get whatever the outcome is, whether you pick 15 of them or you just pick the one, it's still not going to work, right?
You're right. You want to achieve it.
Yeah. And so the number of times I've been in a role as an enterprise architect and I'm doing work, and I'll make sure I tell the team, just so everybody knows, this is not EA work. I'm doing this work, but this is not what an enterprise architect should be doing. So let's be clear. I'm doing either PM work or SA work or BA
Right.
work, but this is not EA work, because that gets clouded, that the person with the title doing the role, because I'm filling those gaps about, like I said, it doesn't fit. We need to be dynamic. What I've seen failure is when the EAs have been the ivory tower people, we don't do that. As a chief architect, I've got to go out and, or corporation not big enough. I've got to go do work. I've got to show my team what good looks like.
Right.
But I make sure they know I'm doing this work, but this is domain architecture work or business architecture work or solution architecture. But I want you to know that I'm helping you out. I'm doing this, but understand I've got a different hat on at this moment in time. I think that helps with some of the repeatability and fitting it into the current structure of the organization.
That brings up something, right? And I'd love to hear your insight on this. So when I was at Microsoft, I was in charge of the segment architecture part of the team. So there was a data architecture group, and it had a couple people in it, but then I had the segments. And so I had somebody under me who worked for OEM. I had another person who worked for licensing. I had another person who worked for finance, another person who worked for retail. Remember Microsoft Retail? That one's dead, hopefully. So they were assigned to different business units. I was assigned to operations myself, right? So in that context, one of the things that we discussed at length is, do we have BDAT architects? Do we have domain architects? Or are we all enterprise architects? And then kind of the old T level, you're really good at one or two areas, but you can do all of them. What do you think works better? Is it the T-shaped architect, or is it the domain-specific, very deep architect in their domain?
I like to see the combination of the two. And I think, Debasish, I'll be curious because I took this from you. What I like is having my solution architects that are line of business aligned. So I have sales and marketing solution architects and manufacturing solution architects that understand the business value. And then they have domain architects to say, hey, bring me my security guys to talk about authentication authorization patterns. Bring me my information architect to talk about data patterns. Bring me my integration architects to talk about gRPC versus REST versus SOAP. I want them all to come together. But I don't expect my solution architect to deep dive into authentication patterns and know the difference between OIDC versus SAML. That's the domain architect. But he needs to understand, or she needs to understand, what the value to the business is. If you make them do this, it's going to be obtrusive and like MFA. So that's where I see the balance. The SA's got to have that business architecture alignment and business value. My domain architects, they can just be my tech jocks that know the tech inside and out. That's how I see it. Debasish, I picked that up from you, actually. So if you're going to defend it, I'm really curious what you have to say.
Yeah, Debasish, what do you think?
Really similar. So I was a chief architect at a media and entertainment company. And so I owned both enterprise architecture and solution architecture. And, small team, large company. And, it's how are you efficient across that? So very similar to what you said, Mike. My solution architects were lined up to business units, right? So I was like, you're the person who's going to really understand the solutions that are relevant from that business space perspective. And then I think from an enterprise architecture perspective, they were similar to domain, but the way that I thought about enterprise architecture, and I'm going to admit that my definition of enterprise architecture is completely different from what the industry is. it may look a little bit more like domain architecture because, again, going towards that always is cheap and sometimes is expensive. My enterprise architects, their job was to work on what I called enterprise platforms, to work on the solutions that needed to service the entire company. And the reason I wanted that, and that required some level of domain expertise, right? Because those platforms, those enterprise platforms, were a domain, really. But it was also because of thinking about how do you design something that scales across all of the complexity of the enterprise, right? Where do you think about the variability or the interoperability with the business specific need versus what is going to be true across multiple lines of business, right? And so my enterprise architects were really like, I had one around SAP, I had one around data and analytics. So they were kind of domainish, but really what I wanted them to do was focus on where can we deliver enterprise type platforms that service multiple lines of business.
So if you had a platform architect, let's say somebody who is focused on I'm going to pick human resources because it tends to be the unloved stepchild of every organization. But they're focused on, whether the particular human resources system. Do they do the business architecture around the HR systems as well as the solution architecture, as well as the networking and technology architecture, as well as the information architecture? Are they T-shaped within that domain space?
They do it all. Yeah. Now,
so I would call those enterprise architects. I would just say that's an enterprise architect assigned to human resources.
So what I acknowledge within this, and I kind of treated my architecture team like consultants, right? So if you ever been in an IT consulting firm like an Accenture or something like that, at least this is how they used to organize. They'd say you've got a business expertise and then you've got a technology expertise, right? So essentially what we would do is we would look at what are the business and technical expertise of our team, and then if we had a really big project, we would dedicate multiple architects based on those knowledge needs. Or more often than not, what I would tell my architects to do is go talk to the other architect who has the expertise and check your work, right? Like do your design, go back to the person on the team who knows that space or the multiple people on the team that know the space and have them review what you're doing. And so that way we were actually mitigating some risk that one architect didn't know enough about the technology space or didn't apply the right pattern. So somebody else would come in and say, well, have you really thought about this? And that became a knowledge opportunity, a learning opportunity for that particular architect.
Just make sure when you do that, you have the benevolent dictator identified that says, I'm going to manage contention. Yes. Because I've seen those things spin off the rails. If you don't have that person identified, says, look, I heard both sides, left and right, we're going left. And you want to check back in 6 months and see if we're still with the right decision, but we're going left. And document why you went left in the context of that moment in time, because you know what's going to happen. So I told you we should have got it right. Yeah, now, but back then it made sense. So I agree with you, but you've got to have that benevolent dictator identified or you'll crash, I think, right?
So how important is
chief architect?
Mike,
so,
the architects are creatives. They're creative people. I mean, it's a little bit like trying to run a team of artists. And so personalities in the way. I've seen arguments. I participated in arguments, but I've seen arguments where, and I wasn't the one who did this, but an architect jumped up on the table and was waving his arms about because people were disagreeing.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. No.
Yeah. He didn't stay at the company for much longer than that. But architects can be very passionate. They can be, and honestly, half the time they're right. I mean, they can be right very passionately. And they're not unwilling to oppose everybody. Right. I mean, you can have an architect who will say, I'm right, and all of you are wrong. How do you build trust in a team and communication so that people can explain and be passionate, but things don't come grinding to a halt?
Yeah. So you've again, I'll go back to the fact you have to have the benevolent dictator. Again, I'll tell a silly little story, right? This is when web development became the big deal, right? I'm working for this bank and I want to build a website. And I'm in the room and the president of the bank is in the room. There's 10 people in the room and they're discussing, should they go with a green theme or a blue theme? Green theme or blue theme, right? 2 hours of conversation. Finally, the president of the company looks at me and he goes, Mike, you've been awfully quiet. It's not like you. What do you think? I go, you're paying me by the hour. I love this conversation. Keep talking. And he goes, you're right. You're right. Blue. It's going to be blue. I've heard everybody. The voice has been heard. We're moving forward. Because if you don't, you'll continue to. Now, the person that sat in there said, no, I want it to be green. If they want to leave, but they had an opportunity. They were heard, their voices were, and the reasons were documented. And I've been on the side of, I didn't get my way. And let me tell you, if you made a mistake and it was proven wrong, I'm going to remind you, right? But I'm also going to be a good team partner and say, okay, the room's all going left. I want to go right. It's on me now to be a professional and help the team succeed going left. And if you have someone on your team that doesn't want to do that, get rid of them. Right? Because they're going to be poison to you. You have to. It's hard to do, but you have to. That's what I think, Nick.
It's funny because I had a reasonably good sized team. I had 16 architects, and I don't think we had very many of those. And if I think back to why is that, not because they were less passionate or less artistic. I think to a person, they were exceptional technologists. I think it's a little bit of the culture you create, right? In terms of the team and what does teamwork mean? Because, for me, what I always say is, the job of an architect is to tell somebody their baby is ugly, right? Because invariably, you're going to run into somebody who is so invested in their idea that, when you criticize it, the way that's received is you're criticizing them, right? And so I spent a lot of time trying to make sure people understood, don't get too attached to your ideas because you might be wrong, right? As soon as you attach your personality to this idea, right?
Yeah.
Now this becomes a personal attack. And now we can't make good decisions because we can't do it without your esteem being assaulted, right? That's not a great outcome. So we can't be attached to ideas. Ideas are ephemeral, right? Like they don't have any innate value, and we can be wrong. It's impossible in an enterprise to know everything. Nobody is that smart, right? Like definitely not me.
Let me ask that question then. How important, because I think this is very important, how important do you guys consider mentoring as part of the role of an EA to go to the other types of architectural and solution design roles to teach them? Because to me, it's very important. I'll take an architect aside and say, hey, look, I don't think you did that right. And here's why I know, because I did that wrong too. I used to do that and what you did. So I consider that a big part of my role as a chief architect, to mentor and share and say, look, you did that. Next, I'm talking about storytelling. I'm trying to embolden in my team. We got to be storytellers, right? You're talking tech to the business partners and they're tuning you out. I want you to tell the stories. And how do I know that? Because I learned to tell stories. And I want you, not because I'm perfect, right? Because I never did that. And I want you to do it faster than I did it. So what do you guys think? I think mentoring is a big part of this role, for me at least.
I think it's a big part of the chief architect role.
Yeah.
I worry that the ability
but only in
to
those
mentor,
models where they have chief architects. So that's only two.
But I think that the skill of mentoring requires a personality that works well with that idea. And not every good architect has that personality trait.
Fair.
So I would agree, but only to the point where if it's something where that particular architect already has that personality trait, I'd love to have them be a mentor to other architects. I do believe, though, that there are some architects you should never mentor anybody.
Sure, that's fair too. That is a fair point. That is a fair point.
Yeah, I'd kind of say if they can't mentor somebody, if they can't share knowledge, if they can't educate somebody, then they're actually not that useful.
Well, no, that's different. Sharing knowledge and educating are a little different than mentoring. Mentoring is a very emotional, personal connection. Sharing knowledge, you can stand in front of a room and scream. I had an architect who did that. That's his modus operandi. He'd walk in front of the room and he was right. And he was going to dictate to everybody what was the right way to do it. And unfortunately, he was right a lot of times. And so the company valued him. and they kept him, even though I advised the chief architect in that situation to let him be on somebody else's team. But no, they kept him. But you know, you have to watch out. Those people are not good mentors.
Sure.
God forbid. They would teach somebody else to be like that. That would be even worse.
But like we said, like very often this role is an influence role. Unfortunately, I think that's a terrible thing that has happened with this with this function. But one of the things I think that helps in making it successful, especially in moving forward, in making progress and making decisions, right? That's really what needs to happen. We can't get stuck, and we can't get into a place where people are going to disagree, because then you have, in many places, certainly places that I've worked, a lot of passive aggressiveness, right? That then dooms projects.
Yeah.
And so, you know, one of my mentors once told me that people will go along with anything as long as they have their day in court. And it was super powerful, right? Because I think that's one of the truest statements I've heard. And so I've always tried to see, how do we make sure that people at least get to say what they believe is true and that they feel heard. And then we have the ability to say, okay, I understand what your position is, and we can't do that because of whatever the reason is. And as long as they felt heard, they were more likely to go along with it. And then I actually ended up incorporating that in a process, in a decision process that we used to move a lot of enterprise decisions where you had to bring in stakeholders from many groups. It's consensus, but consensus doesn't mean what most people think. Most people think consensus means everybody agrees, but it's actually not that. Consensus is the place where everyone is okay with moving forward or with the decision, and nobody is willing to stand in the way and say, I don't think the group should do this.
And you support the decision, right? Yeah. Can you support
Yeah.
you don't have to agree with it, but can you support it?
Correct.
Right.
And there are actually, like, I create 4 or 5 gradations of that, right? So, so there's room for people to disagree in multiple ways, as long as they're not standing in the way. And so, you know, what I tell people is, like, where we're trying to get to is a place where we all are willing to go along with this. But if you're in that place where you're saying, I don't agree and I don't think the group should move forward, then we need to hear why is that? Why do you feel so strongly?
So it's funny. I do that with the teams. I'll say, I don't want to challenge you guys. Are we having a right and wrong conversation, or are we having a difference of opinion conversation? Because if it's right and wrong, I want to know. Is there a legal restriction, a compliance restriction? Because we can, you know, let's clear that, because I think that's to your point, Debasish. And then we walk out of here. Has everyone been heard? Yes. You know, we're mostly right in this. I know you don't totally agree with us, but can you at least support what we're going to do and make it happen? And if we're wrong, you can say, I wanted to go the other way. You're right. You're on record. But support us now, and let's all be successful as a team. Again, I think that's what the chief architect, whatever role you want, that's my job, what I'm trying to do with these teams.
Right.
Let's move to consensus. Let's move forward and then support it so it can be successful.
So Intel used to have a principle called disagree but commit. And I think it reflects to this very, I don't know if they still do, but that was during the early days when they were growing very, very fast and they were coming out with chip after chip. And of course, if you can create a processor chip, you're a smart human.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they had some very smart people who had some very difficult disagreements, but that was their principle, was disagree but commit. Well, once the group made a decision and we wrote down why, back to what Debasish said earlier, we wrote down why, then we're going to go. And just like you said, Mike, you know, we're going left.
Yep.
Maybe it's not the right answer, but it doesn't matter. It's the right answer right now. And so if you disagree with it, fine, you're right. You had your day in court. But now we're going to commit to all of us are going to sign up. We're not going to be passive aggressive about it.
Right.
And we're going to go forward. And then if it turns out to be wrong, hey, we could all face that.
I was at MuleSoft, and when I joined there, you know, part of Salesforce, but the MuleSoft culture, the first couple of meetings, I walked away and went to my boss. I go, wow, that was some really open and transparent. He goes, yep, we call it radical candor. Like you are encouraged to say, I think that's a dumb idea. I don't think, and then they say, you've been heard. Yes, we're still going to do it, but you were heard. It's been documented. We know you're on record. Thank you for your open. Because look, I'd rather the MuleSoft people do it than our customers do it, right?
Right.
So like that was encouraged. I thought that was great. I really enjoyed that. I thought it was a great process to kind of vet out, are we really, well, you don't want to say the emperor has no clothes. I want someone in there to say, I don't agree with this. I don't think, challenge us. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
But when we get to a decision point, I need you then to let that go and say, now we move forward. Right.
Gentlemen, have you noticed that we've spent most of this time where we're talking about enterprise architecture, talking about humans?
Yeah, that's a great
I
point.
was literally just thinking.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
We
well,
haven't talked about SOA or integration or interfaces. We haven't talked about multi-threaded or cloud. We haven't talked about
we haven't talked about
humans.
frameworks that much.
Yeah. 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 I thought we'd all be diving into the ADM, right? Come on, let's go to,
Oh yeah, you want to you want to hear my conversation? How I can really piss people off is when I'll tell people the ADM is useless, and then we get some very interesting conversations.
Then you get some dialogue going, right?
But at the end of the day, EA is human.
100%. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's a great observation. Yes, thank you for that. Saying that out loud, I appreciate it. That's good.
Because what have we talked about
Yeah.
for the past hour? Right? We
Yeah,
talked
you're
about
right.
trust, and we talked about communication and disagreement and consensus and benevolent dictator and
Well, you're right.
structures and how people chase each other.
Yeah, that's a great point.
100%. I never think that the technology is the hard part, right? There are 100 ways to solve the problem. It really, at least to me, architecture was always about the change management and how do you move people from the current state to the future state, whatever that was. And how do you navigate that path? And it is a set of human skills and human behaviors to be able to navigate people to that place. This has been great. As you point out, Nick, we barely scratched the surface, but I do think that we covered a lot of, what are critical elements to making this function successful. And they aren't what architecture framework you use or what architecture patterns you support. Right. So I want to thank you so much for joining us, Nick, Malik, the CEO of CTO Resources. Mike and I are both really grateful for you joining us. It was a fantastic conversation. And I hope for those of you watching that this was useful and helpful to you. We'd love to hear what you think in the comments. So please feel free to use that. Please, if you enjoyed this and you enjoy this programming, please like, share, subscribe. You'll find us on YouTube as well as all the major podcast platforms. So I encourage you to do that. We will have Nick's contact information in the notes. So feel free to reach out if you can use some help with architecture and certainly scalability, agility, those topics that Mike and I are happy to help you with as well. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.